Dr. Jack Wolfson, I've been wanting to have you on the show for quite some time, as we are 400 plus episodes in and have not dove into heart issues, cholesterol, what people can do, cardiovascular disease in women. So when we met just a month or so ago, I thought, oh my gosh, all my prayers have been answered. I finally have the natural heart doctor that America loves. And I am just blessed to have you on the show. So thank you for your time today. And thanks for coming on.
That is quite the intro. I bet you say that to all the guests. I've been wanting you on for the longest time. There's been 400 episodes. But yeah, so
It's
I've been
time.
waiting for you to ask me. So I'm so happy and love all the stuff that you do and love, again, your message and the importance of thyroid health and really empowering so many, women in particular. I think that although, there's clearly men with thyroid disorders, but it really hits, I think, women a lot harder for, as so many illnesses do for a whole variety of reasons. But yeah, thank you for having me on. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you for that compliment as well. So right back at you. No, this has been a topic that I've wanted to dive into, that obviously I get a ton of questions from my audience, from my patients, everyone. And even when we're looking at blood work, right? And I have to explain to women like, no, your cholesterol isn't that bad. Yeah, I know it's flagged high. Yeah, I know your PCP wants you on a statin, but we're going to dive into all of that. I can't wait. But first, we have to start with your story, because you were conventionally trained. So what shifted for you to now take this natural approach and give people the message that you are giving to everyone, that, hey, listen, your lifestyle, your nutrition, your sleep, your mindset, all of that can play a role in your overall heart health?
Yeah, if you think about the movie The Matrix and about like this living in like this fantasy world, that so many people are, a machine controlled world. I'd like to say that I was born into the medical matrix, where my father was a cardiologist, so he's talking cardiology stuff while I'm in my mother's, womb, and he'd be talking to my mom and to his partners and stuff like that. So I would hear all these things that they're talking about, and then of course as a kid and as I start to grow older, my father was my hero, and I wanted to be exactly like him, and that's what I would do. He was a cardiologist. I became a cardiologist, and as I reached the pinnacle of the cardiology, again, training and chief cardiology fellow, I would join the biggest group in the state of Arizona. My career is absolutely taking off. Meanwhile, he's sick and dying of a Parkinson's-like illness called, which eventually they would diagnose at the Mayo Clinic with progressive supranuclear palsy, or PSP. And Mayo Clinic says, we've got no idea why your father is sick and dying, and we've got no treatment for him, and he will, die on average in the next 3 years. And simultaneously and serendipitously, I met this 29-year-old doctor of chiropractic, and she tells me all the reasons why my father is sick and dying. And the Mayo Clinic has zero reasons. Here's the 29-year-old chiropractor. She's got all the reasons. And I listened to her because, number one, she's smoking hot. And number two, it made perfect sense. I saw so much sickness around me. I saw so much sickness, obviously, in my father. And it was just this awakening from a total medical brainwashing of, wow, there's actually reasons why people get sick. In your world, there's reasons why people have thyroid disorders and hormonal disorders and everything else. And all these reasons are all the same. I mean, the same things that lead to heart disease are the same things that lead to thyroid disorders and brain disease and cancer and everything else. So, then I would just start to, I would change my personal, existence, because, this woman who would eventually become my wife and the mother of our 4 children, she would, say, you're going to follow in the same steps as your father. You may not get PSP or Parkinson's, but you may have a heart attack or a stroke or cancer or whatever, and you better change, because I was on that same destructive path. So I would change. I would, try to change inside the medical realm. Again, I was a hospital-based cardiologist, tried to teach my partners. Nobody wanted to listen for all the reasons you can imagine. They don't want to listen. And then I would leave and start my own company in 2012. And now it gets me on with amazing people like you. So thank you.
That is so cool. Okay, now I get why you called her smoking hot, because she became your wife. So that's amazing. And I love that you have that balance almost in your household. Now, of course, you've kind of come over to the integrative functional side of things, but you really have that nice balance between her training in chiropractic and then your conventional training, and just blending those two worlds together. And that's really what we need in medicine, more of. Moving to women, because really, I mean, the majority of my listeners are women. And we hear over and over again that cardiovascular disease is a bigger killer of women than cancer. Is that true? Is that still true to this day?
Well, I think, they kind of go neck and neck, but let's just say those are the biggest killers, or ultimately on the death certificate, it'll either say heart attack, it'll say stroke, or it'll say cancer. So, they're up there. And, women are notoriously, they're not studied, first of all studies on pharmaceuticals. I mean, they're so heavily slanted towards the men. It's very clear that when women come to the emergency room, and they don't have the classic symptoms some of the time. Most of the time they do. They get the same chest discomfort or tightness or, shortness of breath. But sometimes the woman is like, I just woke up and I just feel really exhausted today. I felt fatigued. I just know in my heart, I know in my gut, something's not right. And then we check and we go deeper and we find something there. But unfortunately, the literature is full of the ER doctors not listening, to these women, or even if they call up their primary care doctor, the primary care doctor may be more likely to suggest something else than think it's something going on with the heart. But yeah, postmenopausal women, the risk starts going up, cardiovascular disease, and becomes the same as men. And it doesn't have to be that way. It's just there's much better ways to live and prevent cardiovascular disease.
Now, why are we seeing it though? So I've heard you talk before, and you say that it's really not our genetics. So many people say, oh, well, I have heart disease because my mom had it or my dad had it and it was passed down. But you're saying it's not really a genetic issue. It's more of an environmental issue, toxin exposure. Can you expand on the why? Like, why are we getting hit with heart disease?
Yeah, there's no gene, that says, that you should have a heart attack. Why would there? Why would God or evolution, whoever built us, or a combination of God created evolution, give us a heart attack gene or a cancer gene, really in that sense. Now, there can be genetic changes that when stoked can lead to disease. Of course, that's called epigenetics. But I want people to understand and not that it's not their genetics. Don't blame their genetics, because that's what doctors love to do, is say, well, it's in your genes. There's nothing you could do about it. Take this pharmaceutical, when in fact, there's everything you could do about it. Genetic wise, we can run and jump and see and feel, and, we can make babies. We can do some pretty impressive stuff. We're not genetically programmed to have heart attacks or strokes. It's all man-made. I blame the men on this one. It's all the man-made poisons, the unhealthy lifestyle, the poisons, in our world that the men created that lead to cardiovascular disease. And everything really stems from violations of eat well, live well, think well. When you eat the wrong foods, not enough of the right foods, when you don't practice the healthy lifestyle, and then the thought process, when when you're an unhappy person, you get sick, and I know this and your expertise, when you talk about this, related to thyroid, conditions. When you're depressed, anxious, fearful, you're in a state of fight or flight, you feel socially isolated, which was very common over the last, several years, for people to be out of their tribe, out of their community, which is why community is so important. And I love the idea that you really cultivate the community amongst your, tribe. That, again, these things are absolutely critical. And when we follow those tenets of eat well, live well, think well, I think people get the best results cardiovascular wise.
I love that because I see that, even that mindset. So we kind of know live well, eat well. It's been talked about, at least. I mean, it needs to be talked about more, obviously, and really the point needs to be driven home. But the think well, that's very interesting. And I'm so happy that you said that, because I've been talking more about that lately with my community and even with my individual patients, and really how we think will ultimately drive our health. So if we're walking around thinking, oh my gosh, my mom died of cardiovascular disease and my dad had a heart attack and I'm just doomed, that it's in my genes and I'm going to get it. It's going to hit me one day. It's like, yep, you're probably right, because you are going to think your way right into that. And then, just like you said, being in that fear-based state, just the inflammation it causes. I mean, how much do you see our thoughts really driving our health in your patient population?
Well, I mean, let's take just, I mean, every cardiologist knows of a diagnosis called SCAD, spontaneous coronary artery dissection, one of the leading causes of heart attacks in premenopausal, perimenopausal women, where the artery, there's no blockage there, just all of a sudden, it's just a shearing of the layers of the coronary artery in between what's called the intima and the media. That's where this shearing occurs. It's called SCAD. And that is much more common in people who are under chronic stress and then acute stress on top of that, where that happens. So that's called spontaneous coronary artery dissection, real problem. Another one is called Takotsubo cardiomyopathy, where these women they come in with chest discomfort. We do an angiogram, and there's no blockage. Everything's totally clear, yet a large part of the heart is no longer moving. It's damaged and it can recover, but oftentimes it doesn't. So it's called broken heart syndrome, officially Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. Takotsubo is a Japanese term for octopus, doesn't matter. But it's the broken heart syndrome, and that's classic 55-year-old woman. She's arguing with her spouse, maybe with her boss, maybe something traumatic happens, and then boom, that occurs, and that could be lethal, it could be deadly. So that's one thing to for two things for for women to look at and to therefore take a step back and say, okay, well, I have to really reduce the stress in my life, however they would do it. And of course, there's a lot of different experts, but for the purpose of, I think, where we're going right now is that massive category of think well, it's just as important as the food we eat. It's just as important as the lifestyle that we lead. Every time I talk to someone who's had a heart attack, had a stroke, there was some kind of stressful event that occurred there, and it's a problem. And this is all in the medical literature, by the way. The other thing I'll mention real quickly is this childhood trauma, emotional trauma as a child, that those people who suffered that are at markedly higher risk of heart attacks, for example, and other things.
Mm-hmm.
And would say, okay, well, maybe the childhood trauma person, they eat worse, drink more, smoke more. When you exclude those factors, you try and control for those, they still have a higher risk because of this chronic, post-traumatic stress state, that they're in. So it's pretty crazy.
So in the PTSD world, are you also seeing a greater incidence in, let's say, first responders, military, anyone that would have that typical PTSD? I mean, yes, we can have PTSD from childhood trauma, but how we think about it in day-to-day life is more connected to like military first responders. Do you see a greater incidence?
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's a great question. The answer is definitively yes, they do. And the other thing also is that I think that there's an issue with PTSD from a medical diagnosis. And maybe, you can touch on that as well. So it's like once, I mean, I think a lot of, your people, especially, they're happy once they get this diagnosis and say, hey, listen, it's a thyroid issue. And if we, tweak this and fix this and work on this, then we can really get you back to health. But in my world, where I see people who have had heart attacks, who have had strokes, it's very traumatic, and it makes them really on edge in a lot of different ways, and they're very concerned, as they should be. But it can also go overboard. Like, they can spend so much time worrying: am I going to have another heart attack? Am I going to have a stroke? Am I have another episode of atrial fibrillation? Or, again, that factor is definitely important. But it makes me also think about, when you're in this thyroid space, and how many women, unfortunately, and these are maybe younger women, the 25-year-old, 30, 35, who go to their doctor, my heart skips, it flips, and the medical doctor is like, it's nothing. Or, yeah, you're having PACs and PVCs, not a big deal. Go take a double dose of, Prozac, and you're good to go. And I know, of course, thankfully, yeah, these women and men, come to, doctors like us and really get, resolution on these things, because although it's very easy for the medical doctor to say no big deal, like for some women and men, it's, 5 extra heartbeats a day. It's ruining their life. Like
Mhm.
they're dysfunctional because they're so worried about it. And it's great that we can help those people.
Yeah, no, I agree. I see that all the time. There really is like health PTSD, especially when you're in the system too, and you're not getting the answers like you alluded to. It's super stressful. So I'm going to move on to the big question, the one that I have been waiting for you to come along and answer for over 400 episodes. Cholesterol. So we're going to talk about the panel. We're going to talk about testing. But first, let me start off by saying, I mean, this is not going to be a surprise to you, but I'm saying this more for the listeners. I can't tell you the amount of lipid panels that I look at that are flagged high. And I heard a long time ago, it was actually my husband that said, did you know, and you can clarify this if this is true, did you know that the total cholesterol panel used to go up to 300 before they flagged you? And now they moved it down to 200, put more people on statins. I'm like, I didn't know if it ever went to 300, but what is with the cholesterol panel? We're putting so many people on statins because they get a little H or an L next to their cholesterol panel. First of all, the big question is that what we should be testing? And can you break down your optimal ranges of where people should actually be concerned as opposed to seeing that little H next to their total cholesterol or their LDL?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's so much to that. But let me kind of preface this by saying, I guess I would say I'm the ultimate insider, as far as, the pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceutical industry in 2024 is over a $1.5 trillion industry. They make money by selling drugs. And when you are in bed with the lab testing companies and the medical doctor communities, and you put that little H on that piece of paper that says hi, which means time to go on a prescription drug. They got it dialed in perfectly. And you talk about PTSD. What happens to the person who's looking at their blood test? Oh, but they got all these red flags on there, all these H's. Now they're in this total, feared, worried state. So yeah, it's all controlled by the pharmaceutical cartel. That's all there is to it. It all starts and ends with them. I got so many stories about about pharmaceutical, companies. Real quick, let me tell you this. In 1988, when I was in high school, my father took us on a trip to Hawaii. So it was my mother and father, they're sitting first class. My brother, sister, and I, we sat in coach class. We get to Hawaii, beautiful hotel, all the meals, all the alcohol, all the excursions, going on fishing boats and water skiing and jet skiing. All this stuff is all bought and paid for by Merck Pharmaceuticals. Merck Pharmaceuticals. And my father spoke for 1 hour. He spoke for 1 hour, and the entire trip, I'm sure he got honorarium on top of that, but again, everything was all paid for. So that's where pharma money comes in. So pharma drives the whole thing. So the question is, really is that what is the perfect level of total cholesterol? I want everyone to understand cholesterol is vitally important, right? All of our hormones have some, predication based on cholesterol, all of our sex hormones. How does it relate to thyroid hormone? Well, I mean, the thyroid gland is just loaded with cholesterol. I mean, it's just how the body functions. Of course, vitamin D comes from cholesterol. Sun hits the cholesterol coursing through the skin, becomes vitamin D. Our digestion is from cholesterol, and cholesterol is therefore, it's present in every single cell, some membrane, in the mitochondria. That's why chicken eggs contain cholesterol, why mother's breast milk and animal milk contains cholesterol, because that's how those animals, become, come to life. All right, so total cholesterol, we know this from the Mr. Fit trial, 1970s, 160 to 260 is the optimal range. In there, anything above 260, higher risk of dying. Anything below 160, higher risk of dying. So you want to find the perfect cave person cholesterol for each one of us. So when you eat the right foods, live the right lifestyle, think the right thoughts, you find the perfect numbers for yourselves. A lot of your people, may be into, keto eating, carnivore, type eating. There's an entity called lean mass hyperresponder, where these people, they develop total cholesterols, 500, 600, 700. I think it's normal for a lot of those people just based on their diet, and I don't find it problematic whatsoever, especially when we check those more advanced markers of inflammation and oxidative stress. And if they don't have inflammation and they don't have ox stress, then I don't consider that a problem whatsoever. So I guess in a long-winded way of answering this question, Amy, I really don't even look at those numbers of lipids. I'm much more interested in those markers of inflammation, ox stress, and if those are abnormal, we need to figure out why.
Okay, so what would you test? What are your favorite tests to look at? If you wanted to look at my heart health and I want to know, am I at an increased risk despite my lifestyle and thoughts and everything that I'm doing, what would you test on me?
So the number one thing I would look for are markers of inflammation, oxidative stress. That's for sure. As far as seeing what your status is. Now that doesn't tell us the why. It just tells us yes, you're at risk. So if those numbers are high, we got to figure out why. If they're normal, then we can kind of rest back a little bit and look at some other parameters and dig a little bit deeper, just in a preventive way. But in general, those are the things I would look for. One thing I never do is I never order a coronary calcium scan. I never order CT scans. I don't believe that it is healthy. It's radiation. It causes inflammation, oxidative stress, causes heart disease, causes cancer, causes brain disease. And I don't find that test useful. If your score is high, now what? We're going to recommend the same thing. Eat well, live well, think well. Score is
Right.
normal, same thing. I'm never going to recommend a statin drug. I have not prescribed a statin drug in over 10 years. There's other classes of drugs, PCSK9 inhibitors. I don't write for those either. It's not that I'm just anti-pharma just because I don't like pharmaceutical companies, which I don't, but it's because they don't work. That's the problem. They don't work. Statin drugs do not have any significant benefit in reducing anything, and that's not even including side effect, profile with that as well. So many different things to unpack, with that conversation, but. As far as like other tests, I love doing intracellular vitamins and minerals, and I love doing toxin testing.
Mhm.
Recent study came out where they talked about they looked at carotid artery plaque. So they looked at these people who were undergoing surgery to remove the plaque in their carotid arteries, the arteries that supply the brain. So what they did is that they looked under a microscope at the plaque, and a lot of these people had evidence of plastic. They had microplastics in their artery. Two-thirds of the people had plastic. Surprisingly, one-third of the people did not have plastic in their artery. The group that had the plastic had triple the risk of heart attack, stroke, and dying in a 3-year period versus those who didn't have plastic, which makes plastic a bigger risk factor than smoking, alcohol, diabetes, obesity, hypertension, all those things combined. So I love doing BPA, testing on people, advanced urine, endocrine, environmental toxin, testing. And I'm a huge mold testing guy. Please, people out there, get tested for mold, test your house for mold. I think it's a 21st century crisis, although it's mentioned in the Hebrew Bible 3,500 years ago by Moses. He writes, a lot about it in chapter 14 of Leviticus. It's right there. And the medical doctors these days, just like your doctoral, degree, Dr. Amy, in nutrition, we know nothing about nutrition, and we certainly know nothing about mold.
Wow. Okay. We're going to hit mold, back to the plastics. That blows me away. Now, it shouldn't, because I interviewed Dr. Tom O'Brien. He was talking about how he had a treatment done. Now, it's not here locally in the United States. He went to Sweden, Switzerland, something like that, Switzerland. And they were basically filtering his blood, and the container had all this sediment, debris. He's like, "What's that?" They're like, "That's plastic, literally coming out and being filtered out of your blood." So it doesn't surprise me, but yet it surprises me. And I'm sure it still surprises the audience. And I think we have to say this over and over again to really drive the point home. Like, stop drinking out of plastic water bottles, stop heating your food in plastic. And we're still going to be exposed to it to some degree. But if we can control what we can't control, we're at least helping our bodies, right? Even if you can't fly to the Swiss Alps to get a treatment done, we're still helping our bodies. So I'm blown away and happy that you mentioned that. That's crazy. The mold, you asked me about the mold as well when you interviewed me for your podcast, and how mold affects thyroid. So touch on that briefly. How much do you see mold as kind of a hidden culprit for heart disease and cardiovascular disease overall?
Yeah, I think it's big. I think it's mold comes from two places. It can come from the environment. It can come from food, and I think both can potentially be highly problematic. And that's why everybody should get tested. We love that idea, that mantra of test, don't guess.
Mhm.
But the mold is so fascinating because, listen, we talked about plastic, or we can talk about mercury and lead and phthalates and parabens and all these different environmental toxins, which are bad, but none of them are conscious. Like you and I talk a lot about, gluten, for example, but gluten is not like this living, breathing entity that says, I want to give this person celiac disease, or I want to give this person, leaky gut, irritable bowel, inflammatory bowel, thyroid disorders. Like, it doesn't do that. Mold does. Mold is a living, breathing organism that wants to survive. So it secretes this Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and expels it out into the environment in order to kill off other molds. I'm not going to anthropomorphize this too much to say it's got consciousness like humans, although what do I know? But let's just say that it doesn't. But let's just say it wants to survive. Now, the most famous mold mycotoxin, this chemical bomb released from mold, everybody's heard of before. It's called penicillin. Penicillin was discovered by Fleming when he came in one day and there was mold growing in one of his bacterial cultures and it was killing his bacteria. Then, therefore, was elucidated that that was this chemical, this chemical compound that was a mycotoxin, and then they called it penicillin. And there's others that are used in the medical industry, and one of those actually was the first statin-like drug called citrinin, which is now was originally in products like red yeast rice and similar, that had that cholesterol inhibition, because it interrupts the same enzyme as statins do, called the HMG-CoA reductase enzyme. So this mold thing is really, really big. And it's, women out there, brain fog. We talk about weight, gain, weight loss, gastrointestinal disorders, skin problems, eczema, dermatitis, infertility issues, big thing, with mold. And it's in the medical literature. And like we said before, the medical doctors don't have a clue. And ultimately, I think what happens, with all these different toxins, Dr. Amy, is that, and, Dr. Tom O'Brien, of course, is an expert in this, and of course, many other people, including yourself, understand that a lot of it's the gut microbiome. Once these toxins damage the gut microbiome, then all the floodgates open with this intestinal hyperpermeability, commonly known as leaky gut. These things that don't belong in the body now get in there. You have this immune response related to it. And as you talk about often, this molecular mimicry, where now your immune system is attacking all these different proteins. And then therefore now it goes after your thyroid and your heart, coronary artery disease. One antibody I love to test for in leaky gut panels is called actin, or anti-actin antibodies. And if your immune system is attacking actin, that shows you that your immune system is attacking this protein that is found in all muscle tissue, all dividing cells. So your muscles, your skeletal muscles, smooth muscles that propel food from your mouth to your rear, and then also the heart muscle itself and the smooth muscles and the arteries. So a lot there with that, but whenever it's kind of like the mystery illness type thing,
Yeah.
please think about mold. Give me one more second for stream of consciousness here. Lyme disease is so often talked about, and the diagnosis chronic Lyme never really sat well with me, especially where people, and I'm hearing stories, like these women, they get a port inserted and they get IV antibiotics for a year or two. I've seen cases of acute Lyme. I train in Chicago, kids camping, gets bit by a tick, comes in the hospital, heart rate's 20. The story from where you grew up and stuff like that. It happened. And then they would, we'd all panic for about a week and then they would recover, but this chronic Lyme and the treatment of it never sat well. If someone has chronic Lyme, I will say you must check for mold, because either A, it is entirely a mold diagnosis, or B, you are immunosuppressed because you live in mold, and therefore you have, chronic Lyme, co-infections, Epstein-Barr, these other
Yep.
things. Please, consider mold first.
Yep. No, I see the same thing. If you're, and we talked about this on your show, when you're living in it, when you're living in mold, really there's nothing you can do to get better. It doesn't matter how many supplements, hormones, thyroid, whatever we throw at you. It's not going to improve at all. So I'm glad you mentioned that.
Well, I think that, but, to your point, I think that some people, like, they feel better with what we do, but when you're still not optimized, when you're still not where, you be, and you're like, oh, Dr. Amy, it's incredible. Like, I like 90% of my symptoms are gone, or, but when and they're happy with that, they're like, compared to where I came from.
Right.
But if we're really looking to make sure that people are on track, yeah, but it can be a big one, as you know. It's like when you're living in mold, and I'll tell this too to your audience too, because they're mostly women. I have in one of my presentations, on mold. Then I got a slide like 14 different ways, mold, mycotoxins, cause damage and stuff like that. But one of my favorite slides that I do is kind of like this. And it's like, it's like the man, he's sitting there kind of cross-armed, in the doctor's office, looking at his wife, skeptically, and he's like so annoyed. He's so annoyed because he's sitting there with his wife, and his wife's got all these complaints to the doctor, like, my hair's falling out. I've got, I can't sleep, and I've got, my, PMS is terrible. I mean, all this, all this stuff, whatever. And the man's sitting over there, he's like perfectly fine. He's like, this is all crazy talk, and then of course, like the man is the typical guy who, yeah, he's on blood pressure drugs, he's on cholesterol drugs, he takes Viagra, for ED, like, but he's fine. He's got no problems whatsoever. He's all great, and she's just a crazy one. And the reality is that once you tell this couple that it may be mold, and then the deep dive that goes along with that and the financial ramifications of that, and the man is just so critical, and these women are just like sitting there and they're dying. And I'm not saying the answer is easy.
Right.
I guess I'm just saying, like, for all those women out there, listen, there are doctors, of course, like, Dr. Amy and I, who understand all this and listen to all this and sympathize and empathize with all this. And, you're struggling and you're not deficient in Prozac. If you
Right.
are, crazy, right? If you are, if even if you say, if you say to yourself, am I really crazy? Okay, you may be crazy. We're all a little bit crazy, that's for sure. The stuff that I've said and, in public and on CNN and stuff like that, we're all crazy here. But why? If we're crazy, the answer is not Prozac. The answer is to figure out why we're struggling.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I absolutely love that. Well, of course, I mean, we want to give some love to the guys. So I've talked about the guys too. And I want to get your opinion on this because I have said this for a while. And in the beginning, you alluded to, or you not alluded to, you flat out stated, which is truth, that we need cholesterol. All right, let's start there. We need cholesterol. So cholesterol is a building block for testosterone and for sex hormones and steroid hormones. Do you believe that statins are essentially demasculinizing America? Because we're looking around now. I mean, we're having these men with man boobs and bellies and hips, and it's almost like men are losing their ability to be men. And part of it could be cultural and all that. I won't go down that rabbit hole, but I really think that there's a biochemical component to this because we are dishing out statins for a cholesterol of 201. As soon as they're flagged, they're scaring the bejesus out of these people, specifically men, and putting them on a statin. And I really think that it's starting to affect testosterone and estrogen levels, no?
Yeah, I would definitely agree. And as you said, there are many different factors with the the demasculinization of the men. And it's in the womb. It's
Yeah,
preconception. It's
right.
preconception, it's in the womb, it's childhood, so many different factors, with that. And I do want to say, like, I'm fully supportive of even these children that are struggling with some of these, identity issues and stuff like that. But I guess I would say that, we can be supportive of them, but it's not normal. It's not normal to do that. It's not, the rates of this are crazy high. It's not normal. And therefore we should definitely try and fix that. And, at a very early age, make sure that, they're eating well, they're living well, they're thinking well. All of
Mhm.
these environmental toxins that are all hormone, mimetics, and that as well as to how, that impacts the thyroid and all of our hormones. To answer your question about the statin drugs, I think if I default to the medical literature, there's not a lot of obvious links in the medical literature directly to prove that thought. So I just
Okay.
want to say that there. Now, in my personal experience, I've seen many men with low testosterone levels that are directly related to the use of statin drugs. And when you get rid of them, they go up. So when you talk about the medical literature and the science of a $1.5 trillion industry, you wonder how much truth you're really getting. And is it
Right.
possible when Lipitor is the #1 selling drug of all time, is it possible that some of the data is fudged? And
Yeah.
the answer is yeah, of course. I mean, we see this right now with what's going on, in the news in Capitol Hill and what's happened over the last 4 years. There's a whole lot of lying going on. So, so that being said, when the benefits are not there for the statin drugs and the risks are there with the statin drugs, I think that clearly it's a problem, and that affects the women as well, because if you need cholesterol, women need testosterone, women need estrogen, of course, and progesterone. So it seems to me that if I have a woman who's having some hormonal issues and imbalances there, and they're on a statin drug, that the first approach would be to work to get off of the statin drug, which when you work with me, it's pretty instantaneous. I just snap my fingers and I stop your drug.
Yeah.
But again, and I maybe take this opportunity for the women out there, like, your doctor, you're not married to your doctor. You can fire your doctor. And
Right.
you talk about this as well a lot too, Dr. Amy, right? Like, get a second opinion, like second opinion. And I know when you told me your story, how you went for a second opinion, third, seventh opinion, and then even I know how people, this is great because we do have this freedom of information in most, cases, right now, and hopefully that continues, and we should continue to fight for our freedom of information and freedom to discuss all the things that we want to discuss. That's paramount,
Hmm.
always. But discuss these things with your doctor. If you don't like what they have to say, go ask somebody else. And you mentioned also when you and I spoke earlier about like Dr. Google, or my other favorite one is like, oh, are you a mommy blogger? Are you a mommy blogger? Are you a Dr. Google? And it's like, yeah, I'm a mommy blogger. And what I did was I searched something on the internet, and it took me into PubMed.gov, and I read in the medical literature this amazing article that had to do with poor sleep or lack of sunshine or lack of physical activity or plastics and phthalates and parabens and PVCs and thyroid disease. Like, oh yeah, I just happened to read the medical article that you, doctor, never read.
Right. Oh my gosh, I love that. I absolutely love that. And amen to firing your doctor and working with someone like yourself that actually knows how to get you off a statin safely and do it the correct way, and then actually supplement with what they need to supplement with. So this is going to actually, that statement is going to transition me. I was checking out your line of supplements and I was so pumped to see an AFib protocol. So quick story. This is probably like a year and a half ago. My husband starts developing this erratic heart rate and he could just feel it. He's like, something's not right. Something's not right. So we go to the ER, they hook him up, 10 doctors come in the room. His his heart monitor looks like a lie detector test. I mean, it's like up and down, up and down. I'm looking at it going like to 185 and then down to 120 and then went up to 175. So he's in SVT. So that's what they diagnose him with. And they say, listen, we're going to give you metropolol. That should do it. It should, balance out your heart rate. And when, once you get settled on this, then we can talk about ablation. Now, everything I've ever heard about ablation say, you really don't want that because you're damaging the heart. But the metropolol kicked his butt. And I mean, if he takes an aspirin, that's about it. Like he takes nothing else. So he was really kind of in distress about being on metropolol, eventually just went off of it and kind of deals with the little blips, as he calls them, that he'll get here and there. And of course, I give him, what I know for the heart, but now I'm going to get your AFib bundle, magnesium and nitric oxide here and there. But I guess my question for you is kind of personal, but hopefully it'll help everyone out there as well. Should we be worried about AFib, SVT? Is metropolol something that you would say, well, that one you might want to stay on because it's the rhythm of the heart, or can we do this naturally through nutrients and minerals? And what's your approach to that?
Yeah, that's certainly very common, for sure. And metoprolol is very commonly prescribed for men and women for heart rhythm issues. And it's unfortunate because metoprolol blocks it's a bit blocks part of the adrenergic nervous system called beta cells and the beta receptors on these cells. So the beta blocker leads to all these different side effects, which would be, fatigue, because we need epinephrine, norepinephrine. We need these hormones. That's why they exist. And when you block them, we'll feel fatigued. We will have that loss of energy, loss of, enthusiasm and things like that. With beta blockers, we also see elevated blood sugar. That is very common. Beta blockers can notoriously lead to erectile dysfunction, which men certainly do not want, and neither do their partners, and can also actually lead to loss of erection in females as well. So we want to be very careful with the use of beta blockers. Beta blockers can be used as needed. Like if you feel your heart racing, you can use a little bit, kind of calm you down a little bit, but ultimately correct, right? It doesn't tell us about the why. Why does someone have PACs, PVCs, palpitation, SVT, atrial fibrillation? We always got to go deeper. And really for that, I tell people, it just goes back to the advanced testing that, you and I both do. Like, you do the most advanced testing in the world. You look for all the different poisons. So you look for excess or you look for deficiencies. Are there nutrient deficiencies, whether it's B vitamins, omega-3s, glutathione, CoQ10, all these different things. You and I are both familiar with all the, advanced tests that people could do, gut testing. If you have inflammation and oxidative stress, like we talked about before, you're much more likely to have heart rhythm disorders. And if you want to go for an ablation, the ablation will be much less likely to be successful if you have inflammation, oxidative stress. So you want to optimize yourself before any form of ablation for AFib and for other. There's a time and a place for medical doctors. I tend to bash them, pretty often. But in emergency situations, listen, God bless the men and women who work in emergency rooms and trauma centers. But when it's like the prevention, of chronic illness, the treatment of chronic illness, like they've got nothing. They've got nothing. It's just sad. And it's just sad how, people would go through so many years of medical training and just come out like worthless. I mean, I know you see reports from endocrinologists and you're like, this person has been in practice for 20 years and they went through all of this.
Yeah.
And I would say this, like, Dr. Amy, I would sooner send anyone to you for health related information than any cardiologist I've ever worked with. And I
Thank
mean,
you. I'll
you're
take that as a
awesome
compliment.
and you're brilliant and you could take that as a compliment, but it's kind of like, it's not that they're unintelligent, they're just brainwashed. They're brainwashed into the medical matrix. We learn on day one, it's all about pharmaceuticals. It's all about procedures. We never talk about nutrition. We never talk about lifestyle. We never talk about healthy thoughts. We never talk about root cause medicine. It's sad. It's really sad, but that's the beauty of freedom of information, to be able to get this information out there and tell people the truth because
Oh,
they deserve it. Because there's so many people that you and I both know who are struggling.
100%. 100%. So when we're talking about nutrition, since you kind of went down that rabbit hole and were inspired by your wife to really look at lifestyle, what we eat, and you've totally changed. We're talking about you have goats and chickens and all. I mean, you're living in the mountains, fresh air, you get out in sun. I mean, that's absolutely fantastic. So the average person, when they're looking at their diet, we're in this world. I just came from KetoCon. You have ketotarians there, you have carnivore people there. How, and I know you know Paul Saladino too. How should we be avoiding saturated fats? Is there a danger in doing like a higher fat keto or even carnivore with the consumption of red meat that we used to be told is bad? The American Heart Association, red meat's bad, avoid egg yolks. I mean, how important is getting saturated fats in our diet or avoiding them? What's your stance?
Well, I think, first off, no matter what you do, just get tested. Just test all your different parameters, whether it's your lipids, but more importantly, your markers of inflammation, ox stress, and stuff like that.
Mhm.
Test those numbers and see where you're at. To me, what I think about, I mean, saturated fat, not a problem at all. There's plenty of literature talks about people who eat saturated fat have the lowest risk of strokes, for example. Coconuts, there's islands in the South Pacific where like 50-60% of their diet is coconut based, and none of them have heart disease, and they all smoke cigarettes, you know. So saturated fat was vilified. Obviously, it was all because of big ag. They wanted to push soy and canola oils on us and get rid of coconut oil, which was obviously much more expensive and imported in favor of their hydrogenated oils, which millions of people dying from government influence device where the government advice where the government's controlled by these big corporations. You know, my home state, Illinois, soy, corn, all the different things. So saturated fat's not the problem. One thing that I would say for the keto and the carnivore people is please eat seafood. I think seafood is the healthiest food on the planet. Organs, specifically bison organs, would be number 1A. You know, like bison liver, bison heart, range grass-fed bison. That's what 90% of the meat that we eat is bison, and the next would come from, you know, small amounts of elk, and then, you know, occasional beef.
Mhm.
But we do you know, free-range bison, field harvested bison, unvaccinated bison, some really cool stuff, you know, with that. But
Yeah.
seafood is so important. So, you know, wild salmon, sardines, anchovies, clams, oysters, you know, shrimp, crab. The people who eat the most amount of seafood have the lowest risk of everything. And a lot of the carnivore people, you know, that I see, like they miss that. They're just going straight meat, meat, meat. I love meat. I love eggs. I love raw dairy.
Mhm.
But don't forget the seafood. The bottom, it's actually, I've got a drawing that I came up with, and it's over at the you know, graphic designer, and it's my plant-based pyramid, right? So here's the plant-based pyramid is what it is, and but it's an upside down pyramid. So at the bottom over here is plants. I'm not carnivore. I do carnivore challenges. I'm not. I sometimes go into ketosis, but
Mhm.
for me, I wrote the book, The Paleo Cardiologist. We're
Yep.
hunter gatherers. That's the way that I see it. But we hunt and we gather, and that's the order. But again, like at that top of that upside down pyramid is the free range grass fed meats, and then the seafood category.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, you need to put that out to the world everywhere because we need to flip that pyramid 100%. If people haven't kind of come to light and realize that our traditional food pyramid is really, really bad and was just made up. I don't even know who made that up. I know in 19 what was it, 77, the American Heart Association put out low fat. Everybody cut their fats, focus on carbs, just do carbs. But that was all based on the food pyramid. So maybe that kicked off the food pyramid with having 11 servings of grains and breads per day.
Right. I mean, the the original food pyramid, right? The grain category was bigger than even the vegetable category. I mean, that, you know, that is so clearly written by industry.
That's
It's,
right.
you know, and then of course the meat category was like this little tiny sliver.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, take for, you know, bison liver. Bison liver contains every vitamin, mineral, protein, and fat, not the omega-3 as DHA, EPA that is so critical that you only find in seafood.
Mm-hmm.
Another one of my favorite foods is salmon roe, wild salmon roe. It's a delicacy, and our ancestors appreciated these foods as a delicacy. So
So then if I asked you, who would you like to meet, Dean Ornish or Robert Atkins, you would stay away from the Dean Ornish low fat diet. He was so popular for so long. And I remember doing low fat in the 80s. So what is your take on our kind of old school way of thinking of addressing, you know, our cardiovascular health?
that's so crazy that you mentioned that, because in 2000, as a cardiology fellow, I'm in training, and I'm in Orlando, and I'm at the American College of Cardiology meetings, and there was a debate between Adkins and Ornish.
Oh, I wish I was there for that. Oh my God, that'd be so cool.
The, and those guys hated each other. They hated each other. And I
Right.
walked out of that thinking, Adkins makes perfect sense. But, you know, I was a 29-year-old trainee at the time, and I'm in Chicago, and I'm eating deep dish pizza and Italian beef sandwiches and hot dogs, and, you know, drinking way too much alcohol as a single guy, you know, living in Chicago back in the day. And, you know, it's I mean, you know, so it was like it was on my mind and so it was like, when I would, be introduced to my wife and just talking about, some of the things and some of the concepts that she introduced, and then reading things like Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, by Weston A. Price and the Weston A. Price Foundation. He's a dentist, travels around the world with his wife and looks at all these paleo communities and sees what they're eating. That's a fantastic book. But even, if you watch TV shows today, right? Alone, Naked and Afraid, you and your husband, you guys hunt, I mean, it's just, if you're a vegan and you show up on an island by yourself, like, you're going to die like very quickly. Like, you need
Yeah,
to
you are.
start eating animal products or you'll die or you'll quit the show. So, I mean, all those people who do the best on TV shows like Alone, they learn how to hunt. They learn how to fish.
Mhm.
They catch those fish. They do so well with that. It's super cool.
Oh, I love it. I love that you saw both of them. Well, this is perfect. I mean, this is exactly the discussion that I wanted to have, that my listeners need to hear. So thank you so much for coming on. You're just a wealth of knowledge. You have a great supplement line. So what else, where else can people find you?
Yeah, listen, we do second opinion calls all the time over at Natural Heart Doctor. It's myself. I have another cardiologist, two naturopathic docs, an anti-aging doctor, and a team of health coaches, around the country that are brilliant. So, again, if anybody wants a second opinion as it relates to a cardiovascular concern, obviously, people who know you, Amy, again, you're doing some fantastic stuff over there. But if somebody really has some other, concerns and they're like, I just need that extra nudge from a cardiologist to get off of, one of these pharmaceuticals. Blood pressure drugs are absolute poison. They are not the answer. I got great, lectures and courses and stuff like that, geared towards, those things. But, again, I'm just so appreciative for the opportunity to, to meet with you and become friends with you, to continue to fight to get this message out there. There's 8 billion people on this planet, and, the vast majority are just super sick, and they're not going to get help in the medical industry. It's just not going to happen.
Well, they're not. And I appreciate everything you just said there. And just one last thing that I'll add in is, I think people are also in the mindset of, you trust your doctor. And just like you said, second opinion, second opinion, you are there for the second opinion. So I would encourage everyone, especially if you are on a statin, if you're on a BP med, just call, just talk to his team, talk to Dr. Jack, get that second opinion. Because if you're taking something that is detrimental, and just because, again, big pharma paid your doctor to give that to you and he got a kickback, it might be time to think about your health in a different way. So I'm going to encourage everyone to give you a call. We'll put all your contact information in the show notes as well. So thank you so much for your time today. This has been fun and very informative all at the same time.
Thank you so much.